doing things well is a good thing. We've been praised for doing good things. We've gotten accolades for doing well, getting good grades. All our lives, doing things well has been rewarded. And so it's natural to want to do things well. So it gets confusing when you start talking about perfectionism and how maybe doing things well is a bad thing. Sort of like, what? Come on, this is a really good thing. It's also natural to do things really well when you're a highly sensitive person because you see the subtle things that need to be addressed in whatever you're doing. And it's a pleasure to do things well, to address all of those things and have that completion that feels like you've really nailed it. So it's very natural. The problem is that in life, you can only do really maybe one or two things really well, certainly at a time. And it requires a lot of focus. You have to go super into detail into one area. I sometimes say 1 inch wide and 1 mile deep. It's like I have to be hyper focused. And life actually requires a kind of balance. It's not possible to do everything like that. If I was going 1 inch wide and 1 mile deep in every aspect of my life, it would feel like I'm being pulled in 1,000 directions and I'm being split into pieces because I can't go deep in this area and deep in that area and deep in that area and deep in that area. It's too much. And so the problem with life is that it's hard to do everything really well. Life requires a balance. And that's where this idea of perfectionism comes from, because perfectionism is really just an attachment to doing things well. Nothing wrong with doing things well. It's the attachment. If I'm attached to doing it well, I have to, it's an obligation inside of myself, then it starts to become stressful. And because you can't do everything well, it can lead to a lot of stress. And even in the one area we're going 1 inch wide and 1 mile deep, there's always an infinite depth that you can go to. It's never done. There's no end point to anything. So perfectionism is an ideal and it's very hard to attain. And if there's any attachment there to doing it perfectly, then that's going to set you up for feeling a lot of stress, and it's going to get in the way of you enjoying what you like to do, which may actually be doing things well. So one of the factors that gives attachment is a kind of need to avoid disapproval or to gain approval, a need to prove myself to someone somehow. And it's like, why am I doing this? Why do I have to finish this? And there can be some interesting underlying beliefs here that we can look at, that if you really start to question those and loosen those, the need for doing it perfectly can start to be a lot less. And also, it's interesting, it's natural that we get attached because we got all those rewards. I know my mom used to be very happy when I got good grades and not so happy when I didn't get good grades. And so I've been trained in a way to be attached to getting, the best results possible. So how do you move beyond attachment when you're attached to doing things perfectly? Perfectionism calls for doing some inner work. And inner work means looking at the thoughts that are upholding this particular attachment. What is my motivation for doing a good job? That's really the question. Am I doing a good job just because I like to do my job and it's fun for me and can't wait for the next thing to do? Or am I doing this job because I think unless I get it perfectly, someone's going to find a flaw and then they're going to criticize me, or then I'm going to lose, I'm going to be disappointed. Someone's going to be disappointed in me. If that kind of motivation is there, it's really a fear-based motivation And that's a very stressful way of doing things. So those fears can be questioned. And that's what inner work is. And that's what can open up a new way of experiencing what you're, whatever you're striving to do. So, for example, you can ask yourself, if I don't do this really well, what am I afraid is going to happen? Am I going to lose somebody's approval? Whose approval? You may have to look back a ways. I remember doing some work some years ago on my business, making money, being successful, that kind of thing. And I couldn't figure out why I was so attached. And I looked back and I could see it was my mom's approval. My mom had already passed away, but I was still trying to get her approval, just like she wanted me to get good grades. She wanted me to be successful, all that stuff. So I was trying to please her, and I was actually more afraid of her disapproval than of actually doing, that was the motivation there. Same thing with disappointment. Approval and disappointment, they're kind of two sides of the coin. And so I want someone's approval and I'm afraid of their disapproval. I find for myself, the disapproval is the one I'm more afraid of. Yeah, I want their approval, but I have to do it perfectly so that I don't even have any chance for them to find any flaw that would disappoint them or cause disapproval. Same idea with criticism. If I can't handle criticism from someone, and this is a common thing for HSPs, it's difficult for us to handle criticism, then one of the ways we compensate is to try to do things really, really, really well. Maybe, what else am I afraid will happen if I don't do something perfectly? I might be seen as less than or not good enough. I may not fit in with a group. I may lose my job. Or I may lose clients. I may lose my status in some way. So you may lose a spouse. There could be so many things that you're afraid of losing that drive you to do something really, really well, like perfectionistically. So if you want to do this kind of work, and I love to do this work, I use the Work of Byron Katie, which is a way of identifying some thoughts and then going through some questions to begin to loosen my attachment to those thoughts. So you can ask yourself, what is it that you're afraid will happen? What is it you don't want to lose? And you can kind of fill in the blank. I don't want to lose X. I don't want to lose my job, for example. I don't want to lose my husband or my wife. I don't want to lose some belonging to a group. Whatever it is, write it down in that phrase, like I don't want to lose, and question it. Question it. When you question a thought like that, you'll start to see that, wait a minute, maybe it's not as terrible thing if I do lose this thing, or maybe, just question. And when you begin to do that, the attachment begins to loosen. Another way of questioning would be, I need them to approve of me. So I need my mom to approve of me. I don't want them to disapprove of me. I don't want them to think I'm not good enough. These kinds of thoughts can all be questioned, and they sit at the foundation of this stressful feeling of needing to do something perfectly. So obviously, doing the Work of Byron Katie is a process, and there's, you have to spend some time and give yourself time to do it, or work with a facilitator. But this can really loosen this attachment to doing things well. I've done this many times, and I now sit in the same business that I've always been in, but in a much less stressful place. I remember when I first posted my website, I remember trying to do it perfectly. And now I'm like, yeah, it's a work in progress. That feeling of easiness comes from questioning these kinds of thoughts. I don't want to disappoint people. I don't want them to be mad at me, anything like that. So finally, I want to leave you with a tip for doing imperfection perfectly. This is just a fun way of thinking about it, and it's something that I kind of discovered at one point because I realized that I can do anything well, but I can't do everything well. And so I started thinking, okay, that sounds like I have to do some prioritization in order to stay sane. And there are a lot of things that I want to do, a lot of things that I even have to do. And I wrote them down on a paper. And this was probably on the global level, like the biggest level of my life, but it could also be on a smaller level. So I put, what am I interested in? What do I want to do? How do I want to spend my time? What interests me? What projects? And I wrote them down. So I put things down like, spiritual development. That's always been really important to me. My meditation, doing the work, those kinds of things. I put learning French because it's been a hobby of mine for the past number of years. And I put my business because that's also really important to me. It's something I really enjoy and I get a lot of energy from. I put down things like my pickleball because I play that quite often. I'm trying to think what other things like yoga, dog training. We have a dog and I've been enjoying learning how to train the dog. Doing some exercises like just lifting, doing body weight exercises, gaining a little muscle. These were areas that were important for me. And I went on and on and on like that. So I put them on a big sheet of paper, or actually on a kind of computer document. And I then started looking at them and I started categorizing them. I said, okay, these are areas I want to master. Another category is areas I want to be average at. And then another areas that I don't want to do anymore. And this was an amazing way of looking at it. I'm actually striving now to do some things in an average way and some things in a more masterful way and some things not at all. So this is something that you can play with is make imperfection your goal on some things. Like shoot for a C grade in some subjects. Like that's sacrilege for me, right? I was always trying to get an A or an A plus. And see which areas you can actually lower in importance for you and make them be your secondary or tertiary areas of focus. So like when I did that, I put my meditation at the top. I put my job at the top. These are areas to master. I put French at the top. Interestingly, that was probably a year ago. It's kind of dropped down into the area to be average at now. So that can happen. I put things like pickleball, dog training, bodybuilding, those things, I put them in the average area. That means that I'm not doing those every day. I'm not doing those super well. I'm not investing a lot of time. If they fall by the wayside for a while, it's okay. I'm doing a real average work, C grade. That's all I'm shooting for. And then there are plenty of things that I just put off into areas I'm not going to do anymore. And that's really freeing to not have to do things like that. So that's what I mean by doing imperfection perfectly. If you can make your goal to do it in an average way, then you kind of get to satisfy the perfectionistic side that likes to do things really well by saying, well, that's what I'm shooting for. I'm actually shooting for an average grade here. And then I'll leave you with one final thought, which is, have you ever noticed how an artist draws a portrait, for example? Like those artists on the street where they're just kind of quickly drawing a caricature, or it might be a real artist drawing or painting. The way they do it is they rough out the image first. There's some broad strokes, some kind of rough designs. You can sort of see where the face is, the overall head, the shoulders. This is a general area of the ear, the nose, the mouth, a little bit of hair, something, but it's very general, very loose, very rough, like a rough sketch. That's what they call it. And then they go in for another pass and they start getting a little more detail. And then you start seeing a little bit more of the eye coming in, a little more of the mouth shape. You can see the chin developing. You can see little bits and pieces of the image getting clearer. And it's almost like you're focusing in more and more and more, but never losing the big picture. And then they start shading, and then they start bringing in color, and they start bringing in details. Finally, they're working on eyelashes and, teeth and ear, just shapes. And so the details come in, but always in the balance of the whole. And I love this analogy because when I'm doing things, and I'm thinking, I need to do things really well, I can get caught into trying to do one particular tiny thing really well. Like I might start focusing, if I was an artist, on the eyelashes, but I haven't found the proportion of where the eyes fit in with the mouth and the nose and the ears. So it would be lost. It would be like kind of a waste almost to get too detailed in one area. You might have a disjointed looking face, even though the details are good. So in life, I like to also do that, like rough things out. And so right now I'm doing a major transition in my business, moving one website to another. There's lots of programs being developed, but I'm roughing it out. I'm starting with just, okay, here's the sketch version of it. Here's the sketch version of this. And I'm not getting lost in the details. And this gives me a sense of development over time. So that idea of progression, gradually developing, gradually becoming clearer, gradually becoming finer, that is a real antidote to perfectionism. I can think of myself and what I do as a work in progress. And that allows me to just keep on doing, version 1.0, then version 1.1, 1.2, and over time it gets finer and finer, and it's satisfying. And at every step of the way, the big picture is still there. So I hope this helps. It's interesting to have these perfectionistic tendencies, but it's also equally interesting to begin to unravel some of them and find the joy of going deeply, but not getting lost in that depth, not getting attached to getting somewhere.